All right, joining me now from Tel Aviv is Yossi Beilin, a former government minister, a member of the Israeli Knesset or parliament. He was one of the principal architects of the Oslo peace accords, and he joins me now. Hi, Mr. Beilin.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's great to see you again, because I interviewed you many times in the 1990s when I was a correspondent based in Jerusalem with Canadian television. And you always had a very eloquent and, I thought, clear view of the road ahead in terms of being able to have a two-state solution with Palestinians. But first of all, let me ask you, we have had this horrendous couple of weeks with rocket attacks from Gaza and Israel's response, and also violence on the Temple Mount. What is your assessment of what is happening now? Are we on a circle of violence that just continues to repeat itself, or is this a very different chapter?
Well, it's hard to know. I hope that this is not the case, that it was an eruption of violence as a result of the tensions which are there, which have been there for years. From time to time, there is such an eruption, and then the world intervenes and say, hey, kids in the kindergarten, stop it. Why should you hit each other? And then they say, no, we have to hit a little bit more in order to achieve our targets. God knows what are the targets. And then they stop for a while. If there is no peace process, then things like that may continue. And it doesn't have to be a catastrophic development after which there is no way to get back to any process, but it is a kind of a setback for sure.
It is a kind of a
setback.
It seems to me that, look, there's been violence on Temple Mount before, there has been violence in Gaza, but every time it seems to progress, and it seems to, in my view, the violence seems to get worse. I mean, look at the 3,000 rockets and more this time. Can this just continue on? Because long-term, is it not a long-term threat to Israel's security that's just not going to go away and it's going to increase?
Yeah, if you ask me whether it can go on, regretfully, the answer is not negative. It can go on, but why should it? I mean, this round is less lethal than the previous one, if you count the killed, the death toll on both sides. But this is not the case. I mean, what is happening is that we are having two Palestinian entities. One is in the West Bank and another is in Gaza. And the problem is that the entity of Hamas in Gaza is not demanding anything politically. They don't say, no, we want to have a government, or we want to have embassies in the world, or whatever. They don't want anything. They said, you Jews, get out. Which was, by the way, the view of the Palestinians 100 years ago. And they changed their mind during the years. Hamas didn't change its mind. And you don't know what to do with them. I mean, I don't know what to do with them. If I personally want to talk with them, with some of them, to know better what do they really want, what are their aims, they are not ready to talk to me. I'm their nemesis because I want peace. I want partition of the land. And then they, of course, are not ready for any partition because the land, the Holy Land, is a waqf. And they are not ready to partition the land with another people. So they believe that with violence, with terrorism, whatever, they will be able to push us out of the land. Of course, it is childish.
But at the same time, Israel has its very far right, as the Palestinians do, and they want to push Palestinians out of the land. They want to take more settlements. Sorry?
I'm not sure about that. it is true that you don't have now a partner in Israel. It is true that the leadership in Israel in the last years was not ready to partition the land. And this is the litmus test. All the time, this is the question. Are you ready to share the land or not? And once Israel was not against it, then of course Israel was not a partner. Once the Palestinians were against it, until 88 actually, they were not a real partner. In 88, the Palestinians changed their mind about it, and in 93, Israel changed its mind. That's what happened. But the Hamas came up and said to the other moderate Palestinians, what are you doing? You are desecrating our land, our holy land. And we will do whatever in order to prevent it from happening. And on the Israeli side, the far right, or not necessarily only the far right, was totally against the Oslo Agreement, was totally against partition, and did whatever it could in order to prevent it. This brought to a very, very tough confrontation. And if you ask me today, on the Israeli side, if we don't change the government of Netanyahu, I don't think that we can really have negotiations on peace with the Palestinian side.
So the longer it goes on, Mr. Beilin, the more frustration on the Palestinian side, and the less trust on the Israeli side. All you seem to do is to strengthen the far right, the extremists, and it makes peace even more difficult to even discuss.
And this is why you need ideas, maybe new ideas, and you need the world to be involved. And that happened in the past. I mean, if you ask me whether there was a bigger support in Israel for a Palestinian state 30 years ago, 27 years ago, the answer is no. And you remember it. Israel was totally against the Palestinian state. That changed in 93. And so I'm not giving up on the idea that things will change. And Netanyahu, as you see, is not very strong. I mean, his victory, so-called, is his ability to prevent another government and to drag a caretaker government for almost 3 years. This is what he's doing all the time.
Do you still believe in a peace process? Do you still believe in a two-state solution?
I don't have a better solution than a two-state solution, but if it is impossible, and if there is a government in Israel which is ready for partition, while the Palestinian side, whatever it is, whichever it is against it, then the only solution would be a unilateral withdrawal, like what we did in Gaza. It's bad, it's aching, it is very expensive in blood and treasure. But we will not have another solution if we want Israel to be a democratic and Jewish state.
Why can you not go back to the peace table to begin negotiations with the PLO, which is more secular, more moderate, strengthen Abu Mazen's side in the West Bank, and again, go back to the deal that maybe Yasser Arafat wouldn't sign before, which is access to the holy site of Jerusalem, some discussion of right of return, a real Palestinian state in terms of geography. Why won't it work this time?
Dana, we have the solution. You know that we have the solution. It is the Clinton parameters. It is the Geneva Initiative. I mean, it is in details. It is not, or the talks between Olmert and Abbas. I mean, or the talks with Secretary Kerry in 2013-14. The solution is there. We are not going to now invent the wheel. We know what will happen in Jerusalem about the Arab neighborhoods and the Jewish neighborhoods. We know what will happen on the Temple Mount, that the Temple Mount would be under the Palestinian state and the Wailing Wall will be under Israel. I mean, we know what will be with water, with environment, with and other resources, I mean, we have the map. in such details that we can just implement it tomorrow. The point is not that we need the solution necessarily, although I believe personally that the best way to get to such a solution is through an Israeli-Palestinian confederation. And this is the new, so-called new component that I'm adding to the formula. But generally, I mean, they need it and we need it, and we will have it. We will have it. Eventually, we will have it.
What is the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation?
No, for the one of the most important things for the Palestinians is the access to Israel, to the Israeli market, to the Israeli universities, to the Israeli high tech. And of course, if it is a confederation, it is not a one-state solution, but there is accessibility, which is bigger. And they can benefit, and they say so, I mean, not necessarily openly, but they say so, that they can benefit a lot from Israel. And I think that for Israel, it is very, very important, among other things, to keep those settlers who would prefer to remain in the Palestinian state as Israeli citizens and Palestinian residents where they are. In a confederation, it is easier. And the same goes also for the issue of the refugees, of the Palestinian refugees. When the right of return is to the greater confederation rather than necessarily to their homes, which have been already destroyed in the last 70 odd years. So I believe that another government will eventually do that, although the problem of Hamas is a problem. I mean, I'm not dismissing the issue of Hamas. It was easier for me to say these things before Hamas took over, because I need a partner who wants something for me. It might be even offensive, or at least very difficult for me to compromise on. But at least you say to me, okay, this is the price that I need in order to make peace with you. Let's argue about it. If somebody comes to me and says, what do you want? I'm not going to sell my car. Now let's negotiate. I mean, about what? So Hamas is something I admit I don't have a simple answer to this. And I hope that the Arab world will help us, especially against the background of the normalization and whatever, to deal with the issue of Hamas.
Could you go forward with the peace process in the West Bank with the PLO?
Yes.
And leave Gaza
I don't want
maybe the popularity of Hamas, rather than being bolstered, which it just was probably in the last 2 weeks with this fighting, maybe it would be diminished, and eventually there would be a more moderate faction in Gaza. I mean, I don't know.
What I'm saying is that I don't want Hamas to have the veto power over peace with the Palestinians. So my idea is to sign a peace agreement with the Palestinians, according to the lines that we talked about before, and say to the Gazians, you are welcome to join. When you join, then there will be a safe passage between the West Bank and Gaza, as you were promised, and things like that. But as long as you don't recognize the Oslo process, and of course you don't recognize Israel, it will be only peace the peace will be implemented only on the West Bank, and we will be ready to wait for you. But I admit that it is not the ideal answer.